Hey folks, and welcome back. Today we're going to be talking about some ways you can use logic in your arguments as well as some logical fallacies that you want to avoid. There's quite a few of them, so I'm going to go through them pretty fast, but feel free to pause or rewind if you need to. So let's start with using logic in your arguments. So one thing that you can use is degree. This is basically the idea that more of a good thing or less of a bad thing is essentially a good thing. So for example, excuse me, better a conventional war now than a nuclear confrontation later is an example of the use of degree. Then you have analogies. Analogy is an attempt to explain one idea or concept by comparing it to something else. And sometimes analogies are artistic proofs, and sometimes they're unartistic proofs. So, for example, capitalists are like vampires, obviously artistic. Like Earth, Europa has an atmosphere containing oxygen. This is unartistic. This is just a fact that somebody is sharing with you. Then you have precedent, and this is a great tool to use. These are arguments that are based on a principle or rule that was previously established. So the idea that, like, if a motorist in other states can pump their own gas safely, surely the state of Oregon can trust its own drivers to be just as capable. But there are some fallacies that you want to watch for as a reader, and you definitely want to avoid as a writer. So this first one is scare tactics. Scare tactics are used to stampede legitimate fears into either panic or prejudice. So maybe laborers who genuinely worry about losing their jobs can be persuaded to fear immigrants who might work for less money. And this is something that we see a lot of times with politicians who have like anti-immigration policies. Then you have either or choices. These can be well-intentioned strategies to get something accomplished. You know, parents use them all the time. Eat your broccoli or you won't get a cookie. But it becomes a fallacy when they reduce a complicated issue to excessively simple terms. So, like, you're either for me or against me, or if you don't like America, you can leave. And they're not presenting other viable options here for you. Then we have the slippery slope fallacy. This portrays today's tiny misstep as tomorrow's slide into disaster. A ban on assault-type weapons and 30-round magazines will inevitably be followed by a ban on handguns with 10-round magazines. Well, that's obviously not necessarily true. It's a, slippery slope fallacy. Then you have overly sentimental appeals. These are sentimental appeals that use really tender emotions excessively to distract readers from facts. So this billboard here, it says, "Who would you rather see live?" And we have a rat and we have a little girl. And obviously if you give somebody this choice, they're going to choose to save the life of the child because that's, the ethical decision to make. But what we're ignoring here is the fact that evidence usually shows that animal testing doesn't necessarily save human lives. And so, here we can see a great example of using manipulative emotions to really distract readers. Bandwagon appeals urge people to follow the same path that everyone is taking. And we see this all the time in all kinds of advertising. The idea that everybody else is doing it, so you should too. Then we also have appeals to false authority. This occurs when writers offer themselves or other authorities as sufficient warrant for believing a claim, but maybe necessarily don't have the required credibility or credentials to do so. Dogmatism is when a writer asserts or assumes that a particular position is the only one that is conceivably acceptable. So we see this a lot in politics. The idea that all of a political party is bad, or all of a political party is good, or if you disagree, then you are inherently wrong. We see this in religion as well. Ad hominem arguments are arguments that attack the character of a person rather than the choices that he or she makes. So, for example, when we're talking about who a politician is versus their policies or platform, it can be a misleading conversation. Stacking the deck is when a reader only shows one side of the story, the side that favors their stance. So a lot of critics say the makers of Making a Murderer did this, and that they only presented evidence that made it look like Stephen Avery had been framed for the crime, that all of the evidence that suggested that he actually did commit the crime was intentionally left out to sort of manipulate the viewer's ideas and emotions. Then we have hasty generalizations. This is an inference drawn from insufficient evidence. Because my fiat broke down, then all fiats must be junk. Well, maybe yes, that's the case, but we don't actually have enough evidence here. Maybe your car broke down because you didn't put oil in it. And then we have faulty causality. This is the faulty assumption that because one event or action follows another, then the first caused the second. So I opened my umbrella the same moment I tripped on the sidewalk, so therefore my umbrella made me trip. And we see this a lot. We see this in all kinds of arguments, and it's not always true. Then we have begging the question. This is where you make a claim and you say that it can't be true, but the reasoning you give is the question that we're actually asking. So, for example, if you were to say, you can't give me a C in this course because I'm an A student. Well, the question that we're actually asking by looking at your grade in this class is, are you an A student? And so that can't be your reasoning for why a teacher can't give you a C in the course. Then we have equivocations. These are half-truths or arguments that gives lies an honest appearance. Usually these are based on tricks of language. So for example, if a student copies an essay by rewriting it word by word, she could technically say that she wrote the paper, meaning that she physically used her hand to write it, not that it's her own word. She's not giving you all the information that she needs, and she's being intentionally deceptive, but it appears to be true. If you were ever a teenager, you might have used an equivocation. Then we have non sequitur pieces of information. A non sequitur fallacy is an argument whose claims or reasons or warrants don't connect logically. So if you were to say to somebody, if you love me, you will buy me a new car. Well, there's some steps in between if you love me and then you will buy me a new car that maybe are missing. And you can love somebody without buying them a new car. So maybe these two things aren't connected at all. Then we have straw man arguments. This is an argument that basically nobody is really making, but opponents say, hey, this is what the other guy believes. So the idea that like the Democrats want to take all of your guns. There aren't any elected Democrats that are actually saying, hey, we want to take all of your guns. They are saying we need sensible gun laws and things like that. But you hear the straw man argument all the time, like if you vote for a Democrat, they're going to take away your guns. Then we have red herring arguments. This fallacy gets its name from an old British hunting practice of dragging a dried herring across the path of a fox in order to throw the hounds off the trail. So a red herring fallacy does just that. It changes the subject abruptly or introduces any relevant claims or facts that would throw the readers or listeners off the trail. So maybe a daughter says, I'm so hurt that Todd broke up with me, Mom. And the mother says, just think of all the starving children in Africa, honey. Your problems will seem pretty insignificant then. Well, this doesn't really have anything to do with Todd breaking up with her. And so, we see that the mom is just trying to distract her. Then we have faulty analogies. This is an inaccurate or inconsequential comparison between two subjects or concepts. Politicians and diapers must be changed often and for the same reason. Well, this analogy doesn't really work. Maybe we want to argue about the viability of term limits and why we need them as a nation. But this particular analogy isn't making the argument. Then you have paralipsis. This is when a speaker or a writer says that they will not talk about something by talking about it. So, for example, I'm not going to bring up rumors of my opponent's infidelities because I think it would be unfair. Well, by saying that, he just brought up rumors of his opponent's infidelities, right? So, a lot of times, if you say, I'm not even going to mention how you then that is an example of this. Okay. Those are a lot of fallacies. Go back through them if you have questions. Figure out which one you've seen in something and make sure that you don't use it in your arguments. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, always please feel free to reach out. You can email me or you can get me and your classmates on the class discussion board. Have a great day, guys.